Can you relate to this? Government. It belongs to everyone, and it has a unique relationship with each of us. Government is the only institution that we all must deal with, like it or not, through every phase of life from birth to death. For most people, government services are just a necessary hassle. We deal with them only because we have to. Accessing government services feels burdensome, costly, inefficient, time-consuming, as if governments are stuck in a different century from the one we live in. But what if there were a better way? Imagine registering the birth of your child from your hospital bed. What if keeping your kids healthy was a paperless transaction? What if registering a business could be done from the comfort of your home? What if connecting our kids' classrooms to the internet could connect them to their fullest potential? Shouldn't all of our transactions with government be this simple? What if we use technology to create an open road to the future? The Caribbean Telecommunications Union recognizes that the evolution of information and communication technologies presents the opportunity to create an information profile of each citizen. Caribbean governments can effectively use this to accelerate and fully implement e-government services and transform the public service to deliver a better quality of life for our people. Caribbean people will transact business, stay informed, stay connected, be engaged, anytime, anywhere. This is government for the 21st century. Our future has arrived.
Good morning and welcome to all our participants on the webinar live this morning, as well as those joining us on YouTube and Facebook. This is 21st Century Government, and we are here this morning. Thank you for joining us today at the ARIN CTU webinar series, Accelerating 21st Century Government in the Caribbean. This series is jointly hosted by ARIN and the CTU. I am, for those of you who may not know me, Claire Craig, Research Director of CaribNOG. Before we get started, I want to show you around so that you can participate successfully. Please introduce yourself in the chat in this order. Please enter your first name, your last name, organization, and your country. For example, I would put Claire Craig, Research Director, CaribNOG, Trinidad and Tobago. The chat button is located at the bottom of the screen. During the presentations, you can post your questions in the Q&A. We really ask that you use the Q&A to post your questions and not the chat area. This is located at the bottom of the screen. ARIN and CTU ask that attendees be guided by the code of conduct of both organizations while in the chat and the Q&A. Violations of these codes of conduct will result in the removal of the offender from the webinar. This morning, we are onto our second webinar in the series, and today's webinar focuses on local Internet Exchange Points, or IXPs as they are known. Local IXPs are no longer an option, now an imperative. We have 3 dynamic speakers for you, but before we go to the speakers, we have a short poll of just 3 questions that I am asking you to please participate in. So here is the poll. Your first question, are you all seeing the poll? I hope you are. How many Caribbean countries have an active IXP? Is it 8? Is it 10 or 16? Okay, the second question. How many Caribbean IXPs? The first question, sorry, it's still going. Yes, your answers are coming in. We'll give you a couple more minutes because we know there are quite a few of you on. Okay. Okay. All right. We'll move to the second question, and then we'll post the responses. I will not, let me stop the poll. Right. Okay. Here are the results. Right, so 8 of you thought, 14%, 56% thought that there were 8, 40% thinks that there are 10, and 16%, sorry, 4% thinks that there are 16. There are actually 10 active IXPs in the Caribbean, so more than you thought. Let's go to the second question. Do you know what an Internet Exchange Point is? Okay, 90% are saying yes. Oh, no? Okay. So most of you know what an Internet Exchange Point is. That's good. Let me end the poll. Share the results. So 80% of you said yes, and 20% of you said no. An Internet Exchange Point is a facility, you will hear more about it as we go along today, but for the 20% who said they did not know, a facility where networks interconnect, whose purpose is to facilitate the exchange of internet traffic between internet service providers. The primary role of an Internet Exchange Point is to keep local internet traffic within local infrastructure and to reduce the associated traffic exchange between IXPs. Our third question. An Internet Exchange Point, well, I gave you some of the answers already, so let's hear who is listening. Will keep local traffic, will keep domestic traffic local, will reduce network congestion, and will support entrepreneurship. What do you think? Okay, couple more seconds. Right. I will end the poll since I gave you the answers. This should be fine, and share the results. 17% thought that it would keep domestic traffic local. 3% thought it would reduce network congestion. Nobody thought on its own that it would support entrepreneurship, but 79% thought all of the above, and it is all of the above. So let's continue with our introduction of our panel. Presenters, I'm sorry. This morning, we will hear from, first up for us will be Brent McIntosh, the peering coordinator of the Grenada Internet Exchange. Now, Brent and the rest of our presenters need no introduction, so I will just give you the names. Most of them are well known to all of us. We will then hear from Mr. Curly Prescott, who is chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange Point and the country manager of the managing director of Columbus Communications Trinidad and Tobago. And then we will hear from Junior McIntyre, who's a consultant with the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. So let us welcome Brent to give his presentation at this point. Thank you.
Good morning, all. And firstly, I just want to say it's an honor to be actually here presenting today on what I consider probably one of the most key topics that needs to be discussed, addressed, and to put into action, which is ensuring that local IXPs be an integral part of any country's infrastructure, no matter the size of the country. So today, in terms of what I'm going to show to you, it's going to be just a few slides, maybe sometime halfway through my presentation. But ultimately, I want to tell you a story, and I want to tell you about the GREX story. It's a story in Grenada, and for most parts in the Southern Caribbean, and now moving to the Northern Caribbean, that we've been very proud of, because I think it's a story that has helped transformation in terms of critical infrastructure throughout the Caribbean. So let me take you back to sometime in 2011, around 9 years ago, when we started the Grenadian Internet Exchange. And it was not a startup without a challenge, as any other startup. We've seen IXPs around the world being put into deployment mode and being successful. And in the case of Grenada, it was one where there were quite a bit of doubts. And with those doubts, sort of sprung the motivation for some of us to decide that we're going to make this happen. So through multi-stakeholderism and working with key contacts, we're able to firstly build a relationship that would help spur and move the growth and development towards GREX. So we started with key stakeholders like Caribnog, ARIN, ISOC, and local stakeholders, which were very important. We got the ISPs, discussing with one another, to see how best we can make this work. And eventually, we got infrastructure in place. It was a very small switch, a switch supporting maybe 24 ports and 4 optical, 1 gig ports. We got that switch in place, and all we wanted then was to have the first ISP connected. We got one ISP connected, then great. Our next challenge, getting the second ISP connected. We got the second ISP connected. From there, our next challenge was to get these 2 ISPs to pair bilaterally with each other. That was done sometime late in 2011. And we then had our first IXP exchanging the local traffic. Yeah, how much traffic? Nothing in excess of 5 megabits. Now, one will say, well, that doesn't make sense. Only 5 megabits for that IXP is a waste of time. Well, we found out later on, maybe 3-4 years later, that it really wasn't a waste of time. Let me tell you why. So after the pairing was initiated, then further discussions were held with the stakeholder groups. We decided to build a little group, working group that would stimulate communications with outside partners. We started looking at what services might make sense. Then came the PCH eRoot, DRoot servers. So great. Now we have Anycast DNS root servers sitting in our exchange. That wasn't enough, but it was a very good start. Other ISPs now became interested. Okay, great. We want to pay at the exchange. And keep in mind, some of these ISPs were small. They didn't even have fiber connectivity. There was barriers to entry, and I'll say it openly. One of the barriers to entry was for a provider that doesn't have fiber connectivity, I now have to go to one of the incumbent or one of the other larger providers and say, can you give me fiber connectivity to exchange? Well, that's going to be costly. I'm spending so much money to get to the exchange as opposed to benefiting from saving from the exchange. Okay, so we went back to the drawing board. ISPs decide, fine. Now what we're going to do is connect via microwave. That worked. Now we have every living ISP in Grenada pairing with each other bilaterally on the Grenada Internet Exchange. Now that was awesome for us. So now how are we going to develop this? Groups came back together, the IXP working group came back together. We decided, let's start looking at what would make sense in terms of CDNs, which again happens to be another challenge that is experienced by many other Caribbean islands in developing their internet exchange. So we were able to get Akamai, to send us the servers. That got set up on the IXP, and from then, immediately, local ISPs started seeing the benefits of CDN traffic. Traffic grew from in the space of 3 to 4 years, traffic grew from 5 megs to 900 megs to 1.5 gigs. Okay, so let's move up another 5 years. Let's get into 2020. What happened in 2020? We're now seeing the traffic growth, and at peak times, especially in COVID, we saw it hit 3.5 gigs. So to move from 5 megs to 3.5 gigs in the matter of, I would say, the better part of 9 years, that was an amazing story for us. Now we decided to do more. We didn't stop there. Now Akamai was deployed. Now we moved into Cloudflare. And why Cloudflare? We've realized that a lot of the larger ISPs, already have partnerships with a lot of the great CDNs like Google, Netflix, Facebook. Don't get me wrong, we would love to have them at the Grenada Exchange, but it so happened that some of the ISPs already have them built into their infrastructure. So we decided to look at content that's just not your social media type content, or your content that, you're just online, just, interacting and looking at movies. And we decided to get content that would support the new sort of productivity, what we consider productivity. And no, not just productivity, but what we call work from home content. And with that, we decided to work with Cloudflare. Cloudflare was happy to work with us. And now we're serving Cloudflare's content. And Cloudflare, of course, covers an umbrella of critical work from home type application, including what we call, cloud-based security for remote workers and for corporations. So now we have Akamai, Cloudflare, DNS Anycast servers from PCH, Central NIC, registry. So we have quite a bit of critical stuff there, and we're looking to do more. So I just want to show you, let me share my screen and just give you an example of growth. And I think what's most important for persons is what happened before COVID, post-COVID, before the lockdown and during the lockdown, and to some extent what is happening now. So let me see if I can give you a snapshot of that. Okay, great. So what you're seeing on my screen now is actually a 3-year snapshot of what happened, post-COVID. And I will go back to 2018, and you would see that we were just around, let me look at a peak spot in 2018. We're just around maybe 700 megs of traffic being served. And this traffic, I'm only showing you here specifically to the CDN Akamai. Go up another year, right? A 250 meg increase, about 900 meg. So you can see in 1 year, you're seeing a, quarter of a gig increment of growth. Now, what happened later on, let's say in March 2020, right? For that content served from Akamai, you can see 2 gigs. We've seen peak traffic here, let's see, around 2.48 gigs. So that traffic from Akamai alone, and that traffic consists of things like Windows update, Apple iOS updates, Android updates, and other critical content. This traffic growth spiked during COVID, and even now we're seeing that growth even with other CDNs like Cloudflare. There is another quick presentation I want to show you as well, but I don't think I have this. Okay, here it is. This slide shows you some of the exchange traffic growth. And when I talk about exchange traffic, I'm talking about traffic shared between the 5 ISPs connected and the CDN. So that's total traffic. I just have a snapshot from March that shows you pretty much where we stand with total traffic exchange between 2.5 and sometimes would hit in the 3 gig range. Before that, before COVID, traffic was around 2 gigs, and less. So we've noticed that what makes it so important now, and I know COVID-19 has been the driver for this traffic growth, but what's important to understand is that the experience, that local users and ISPs would have just from having this here makes a huge difference. While we're not a Trinidad, a TTIX, or a AM6 Caribbean and Curacao serving, in excess of 28 gigs, if you compare it on a per capita basis, and users are still having that experience as if they were, maybe in one of those countries, and that is really important to us. And critical infrastructure, we've realized, doesn't have to be something that's deployed today on a major scale, but something that you can grow over time. And interesting, I'm going to stop sharing and share another story with you. So interestingly, how has COVID-19 and critical infrastructures, IXPs, been treated? What I can tell you is that from the perspective of ISPs, they are seeing the importance. And I'm going to tell you that, one of the another large provider in Grenada, Digicel, in the past, they were a 1 gig connected internet IXP partner. Now they have recently moved to 10 gig. We've seen other ISPs who connected in the past at 100 meg. They have upgraded their connectivity to 1 gig. So we're seeing ISPs now increasing the size of their connectivity to the internet exchange. I want to dive a little deeper into some of the additional benefits, right? It's no longer a case where IXPs is a nice to have. We're seeing it as a must have. Sometime in March, I believe March the 31st, there was a major outage here in Grenada due to, I think, electrical problems by the local power company. And there was, some ISPs were affected negatively. And what happened, the IXP happened to be, of course, infrastructure that was up and running. It's, of course, it's now designed to support, full 24/7 support and continuous serving of traffic with power systems being upgraded, and all that. But anyway, the IXP, to go back to that story, the IXP was up serving traffic, serving critical content. And that is where the support for ISPs came in. And that's one benefit in itself that you just sometimes don't realize you need, but you actually need it. And so ISPs realize the importance. We're now seeing corporations and local enterprises seeing the benefits and wanting to know more. As a matter of fact, some of my time, is spent now not just talking to ISPs about IXPs, but speaking to large enterprises, and in some cases, independents who have the ability and the desire to serve local content. I spend a lot of time speaking to them, and that's what we try to do in our outreach. So, in terms of local content, okay. So yes, ISPs are exchanging traffic, but what is happening with local with local content. What are we supporting them? Yes, we are. So we have also developed what we call a micro data center that is sitting next to the IXP, where we host hardware that will support virtual machines for hosting local content. To date, we're hosting 16 local websites, and they are all hosted and on the .gd domain, and that's a big win for us. I think, as a matter of fact, we have one of the first local online a baby store hosted at the microdata center. So one of the key things for us here is to also ensure that we provide an avenue for supporting local enterprise, having local content being hosted, local content being served. And I really want to say that this can only happen if you build that sort of collaborative approach with local stakeholders, regional stakeholders, global stakeholders. We're seeing a lot of expertise, even now trying to share, what their thoughts should be on how IXPs can better serve them. And we really try to embrace that and build that into, our sort of program management for IXP development. I want to mention something that I don't think I've heard much discussions around it, but I also want to mention that the role that government has in terms of utilizing the IXP as well as promoting IXP connectivity for their benefit. That's critical. What I'm happy to note is that the government of Grenada has already established a presence at the exchange, and they at some point are going to interconnect the whole CARSIP infrastructure to that exchange. Why is this important? Because the government stands to benefit from utilizing some of the key content that will be served from the IXP locally, as opposed to transiting upstream into the US, into Europe to pull that content. So we're now trying to facilitate that connectivity and try to look at what other content makes sense. As I mentioned before, we're no longer pushing for that social media type content from CDNs, because a lot of the service providers are already doing that. What we're looking at is content that makes sense for e-commerce business, stimulating ideas to generate new ideas to build new products. So you're going to see us looking at things like Office 365, Microsoft Edge caching, Amazon sort of a CloudFront product that is not fully ready for IXP deployment in smaller zones. But I think even though it's 3 years off, it still makes sense for us to do. So that's it in a nutshell. I just want to say that my involvement personally for GREX as a pairing coordinator has led me to move on to supporting other Caribbean islands and building that stakeholder group which is necessary for developing IXPs. And I just want to mention a few here. I'm getting involved now with Barbados. I'm getting involved now with BVI, St. Vincent, Suriname, and we're already starting to discuss, what makes sense for IXPs in the future as Caribbean countries. And a lot of great ideas are coming out from there. And just to add one more thing before I end, for now, there are IXPs that is currently in development, and I want to single out BVI, that is learning from the mistakes that a lot of IXPs made, including some that we made at GREX. The BVIX platform is now being built upon, these ideas from the past and the mistakes that we made, and they're transforming into an IXP that is very sound and comparable to the ones, even though it's at a very smaller scale, but infrastructure setup is comparable to those of AMSIX and those bigger internet exchanges. So we're very happy to see that, and that's a positive sign. So my note on this is that IXPs are no longer an option or nice to have. They are just as critical as having ISPs on your island.
Thank you so much, Brent. Those Grenada stories, I'm sure those are the participants who are in the audience can get some valuable lessons from some of the stories, particularly starting small, seeing how the Grenada IX has grown, not from 5 megabits and they almost, they at 3.5 gigabits now. We do have quite a lot of questions in the chat for you, but we want to hold those questions because we are only able to have our next presenter on for half an hour. And so we are pleased to have Curly Prescott with us here, who has just carved out the time to be with us. And so he's gonna speak for about 15 minutes. We're gonna ask him his questions, and then we'll come back to some questions with you, Brent, and also have the presentation from Junior McIntyre. So again, most of you know Curly. He is the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange. He's also the country manager and managing director of Columbus Communications Trinidad Limited. So welcome, Curly, and we look forward to your presentation at this time.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Claire. Good morning to all participants. I hope you all are hearing me clearly.
Yes, we are, yes.
Excellent, okay, great. So it's my honor and pleasure to be here just to share the experience of how IXPs or how an IXP has supported the performance, the resilience, I would say, of the ICT infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly during a global pandemic such as the coronavirus, COVID-19 situation. Interestingly enough, I was invited by CTU to present at a forum, at a government, ICT forum, I believe late last year or early this year. I think it was early this year. And one of the things I would have spoken about at that presentation as the benefits of an IXP is providing resilience during national disasters, I absolutely underestimated, did not fully foresee what was coming up with COVID right around the corner, right? So whereas when I presented, I would have been talking about things like subsea cuts, hurricanes, and that sort of thing. We saw a different spin come with the COVID pandemic, where while physically there was no damage, thankfully, but from a way of life perspective, the whole way in which, countries had to operate and to continue to participate in the economies had to change. And thankfully, coincidentally, but thankfully, here in Trinidad and Tobago, we had the benefit, the luxury of not just having one IXP in place, but two. So which would, what we saw from the traffic patterns that were observed during the time, certainly provided support, ensuring that people who had to start working from home, start to collaborate, have online meetings, go on online classes, all of those things, collaborative online classes, all of those things certainly had to leverage the IXP infrastructure that, thankfully was already established in order to ensure that people could continue to participate despite, having to work from home. Now, when I was asked to present and I reached, I asked the, I guess, not so much the master of ceremonies, but the coordinator of this panel, Bevel, do I need to present? And he gave me some very strict guidelines. He said, if you're presenting, ensure that your presentation only shows traffic graphs, traffic statistics, pre, during, and post COVID. So I'm certainly restricting, my presentation today on along those parameters that Bevel would have given me. So firstly, before I continue, can I just confirm you all are seeing my screen?
Yes. In your screen.
Okay, great. So with that, firstly, I'll just show a sort of a high-level chart. So this is basically charting, actually spanning from, January. So this is year to date. This is going from January, start of the year, straight through to now, from one of our internet exchange points in Trinidad. This is actually from TTIX2, as the graph shows, which is our IXP fabric based in southern part of Trinidad. And you certainly see a ramp up, as you can see here, from the first 3 months of the year leading up to the last week in March, right? You know, this is when, and basically last week in March are when the lockdowns would have kicked in. But throughout those first 3 months of the year, generally traffic was more or less peaking just above 3 gig, you know, during Carnival when we were all in the street. So we were at reverse lockdown. We were out of our homes. You can see we wasn't even reaching that 3 gig. But once the lockdowns began, we see a definite ramp up in traffic in peaks, right? So as you can see here, we immediately started to cross 4 gig before the end of March. And then as we rode through the lockdown period, we started to reach it, you know, closer to 5 gig accordingly, which definitely showed, and this is just one of the 2 IXPs we have here in Trinidad. So we certainly saw an upward tick in traffic as people had to work from home, as people had to join online meetings and online collaborative sessions and learning and online learning, even accessing company files from the office, you know. So your business has one particular ISP. You may not be on that same ISP, you're on a different ISP, but be able to access your files and your content and so on, you know, would have leveraged the IXP in those regards. And then another thing which would have gained prominence during these times is as more people were home, you know, online gaming took even higher precedence. So people looking for ways to pass the time. So online gaming would have been another practice which would have emerged during this time, as you know, and while some may say, you know, gaming doesn't sound like something critical, I would say from a mental health perspective, gaming is absolutely necessary to keep people relaxed and you know, provide leisure at times, you know, when you're not allowed to exercise in parks and so on. And again, you know, for you know, subscribers who may not be on the same ISP, you know, the IXP would definitely facilitated a superior experience in that. I'm going to take a slightly deeper dive, you know, showing the change in traffic patterns, you know, pre and post COVID. So this would have been a snapshot. So looking at the top left, this graph is a snapshot of all of various traffic streams, both on IXP1 and IXP2. And we could see the aggregate of the traffic, and this would have been in February, top left graph, a week in February from the, you know, this is around the 10th, 11th of February. You would have seen the traffic more or less peaking just short of 2 gigs. So, you know, the traffic across these IXPs not quite reaching 2 gig, you know, during this time. And just to explain the difference between the graph we saw before and this one, the graph we saw before would have aggregated a lot of other traffic streams, such as caching networks, content delivery networks, you know, Google Akamai. So that's why you would have seen a slightly higher traffic volume. This chart here really speaks to just the domestic traffic, right? Not the cached, you know, caching server traffic that, you know, are also served across IXPs. So we have seen that, again, traffic not quite peaking, not quite reaching 2 gig pre, you know, the COVID lockdowns, right? So then we jump across to the next graph, would be the top right. And this would have been in April. So this is just after the lockdowns. And there are 2 changes in this graph. So one, we've gone from the 1 hump graph, which would have occurred just before peak time, you know, just around 6 p.m. You know, we would have seen a spike there, probably roughly about 1.8, 1.9 gig. Now, when we go to just after the lockdown, so this is 6th, 7th of April, so this is early in the lockdowns, we see 2 humps, right? So we see the morning hump, so this is everyone coming to work at home or going to school at home, you know, from around 9 a.m. to 12 noon, we saw a hump of traffic there, and it's easily crossed 2 gigs. So that morning hump would have surpassed the previous peak, you know, pre-COVID. And then we saw a second hump back at more the 6, 7 p.m. time frame. And again, we see that second hump well above 2 gig, actually peaking, touching at 3 gig, just touching at 3 gig there. So when we talk about growing from 1.8 to 3 gig, we're talking about a traffic increase of more than 50% at peak, right? So that would have been just after the lockdowns. We look at in June, we see things coming back to a little bit of normalcy. So come June, some of the lockdowns would have started to relax. People now trying to go back to the office. So the morning hump would have gone away. But even the evening traffic peak at around that 6, 7, 8 p.m. still well above 2 gig. So that would have been peaking at about 2.5 gig. And we now reached to July. So this would have been a recent graph at the bottom right corner. Again, slightly falling back, but still well above 2 gigs. So what we're seeing is in the new normal, we have an entrenched work demographic or learning demographic who are still working from home, learning from home or whatever, with traffic peaking, well above 2 gigs. So easily at a 30% growth in traffic during that peak time. We'll see how things develop as we go into September when schools reopen and so on. But basically, we absolutely see the value and the benefit of having these IXPs. So to kind of support Brent's point, where IXPs have now become critical during these times, where they're able to respond to and support different types of crises that would emerge, that may occur as part of our daily lives. So that pretty much is what I would want to speak to. I mean, I'll want to not spend too much time presenting and leave a little bit more time for questions. But certainly, and this is just a small snapshot of what we've seen. There are other sort of pairing links between some of the major ISPs. We've seen pairing links which normally peaked at about 2 to 3 gig, go from 3 to 5 gig and so on. So we've definitely seen an absolute uptick in traffic between the various providers, demonstrating that the need for local pairing and IXP pairing, certainly supporting the continued development and the evolution of our economies as we grow and settle into the new normal. Claire, I'll hand back to you. Unless there's something else you wanted me to touch on or cover.
Thank you so much, Curly. There are questions already in the chat for you. It's interesting, and we expected this, that your presentation supported a lot of what Brent spoke about, specifically, how you were able to leverage the IXP for the internet infrastructure during the time of the pandemic. And also, the fact that the IXP facilitated a greater experience for the end users. Since we're talking about the 21st century government, my question to you before I open to the rest, some of the questions in the chat, is do we have our government in Trinidad and Tobago participating on our IXP, considering that there are so many government services that are now available online as a result of this pandemic?
So good question. And I would say indirectly. So they're not a direct pair to the IXPs, but of course, they would have their internet service providers, right? And once their internet service providers are connected to the IXP and pairing with others, then obviously the other subscribers who may not be subscribers of their ISP, the government's ISP, but the wider, national base population would be able to leverage the IXP to be able to access government services. Yeah.
Right. So the key point is once the IXPs are pairing, and I'm sure you have bilateral pairing on your IXP and not necessarily multilateral pairing agreements, right? But that's
yeah. So you're touching into a policy discussion.
Yes.
So in Trinidad, when the whole IXP regime was being developed, I guess there was a lot of hesitation and suspicion. And one of the ways to get over that hesitation and suspicion of being a member, joining and participating, was really to say, listen, we're not forcing you to pay with everybody. There were some valid concerns raised by some ISPs, if a particular ISP, and I, in a particular commercial dispute, do I have to pay with this guy? So we said, no, no need to have to pay. The belief was, the thinking and the philosophy was, just connect to the IXP, just create a common infrastructure where anyone can pay seamlessly and cost effectively. And then let market factors then drive ISPs to realize, hey, you know what? I can actually save money if I pay with this particular ISP. Or this customer who's complaining that he can't play a game with his friend on another ISP, I could solve that problem if I pay. So that was the model that we took up, and we have seen that working effectively for the most part. Yes, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, we are seeing ISPs voluntarily choosing to pay to address whether it may be cost concerns, performance concerns, customer concerns, or otherwise.
Right. Let me go to one of the questions in the chat from Rodney Taylor. He's asking, does your IXP agreement allow for parties other than ISPs to be connected to it? Is it a formal agreement, and what are the requirements to join?
Sure, and that's all available on our website, ix.tt. So yes, you can pair if you're not an ISP. There are some requirements, obviously, to pair. You have to have an autonomous system number. You need to have a certain level of technical expertise. You need to have connectivity to one of the ISP locations. But I mean, once you satisfy these requirements, your ability to connect is fine. I mean, we are not against someone connecting to the IXP. It actually helps share some of the cost of operation of the IXP across multiple members. And then once you're connected, then the sort of negotiation, bilateral discussions take effect, where you demonstrate the benefits of having particular ISPs or other members pairing to you. So yes, the short answer is yes. You don't have to be an ISP. You don't have to have a concession to pay.
Right. Here's another policy type question. What are the specific national policies and regulatory barriers and enablers, on the IXP?
So I wouldn't say there's any particular national policy. I mean, the national policy was effectively that that our IXP does have benefits, and let's create or encourage the formation of one, and that has happened, right? So we have been able to establish an IXP, and as I said, market forces, were enough to establish a second one, right? So there are no real barriers per se to formation of IXPs in terms of our national policy, outside of a policy to encourage the formation of IXPs, a policy of encouraging ISPs to join, and a policy of joining and participating in ISPs in an IXP. Sorry, is primarily voluntary. That there's nothing beyond those policy prescriptions that exist right now. And in my view, and I would say on behalf of my members, we think that is more than enough to facilitate a vibrant IXP from an ISP perspective. I think the next step really has to be about the content and the applications and the services. That part has to sort of, we now need to see, some traction there to even further leverage the benefits of an IXP.
Since you mentioned that, Curly, Brent spoke at the beginning of his presentation about the value of different stakeholders in driving certain things with respect to the IXP. So you're saying that the content is what is needed now. Do you see where do you see that push coming from for the content development? He spoke about the fact that they now have a micro data center hosted on the IXP, which is hosting websites and different things. Do you see that as something that we should be looking towards here in Trinidad and Tobago, or any other IXPs across the region?
Yeah, certainly, yeah. And I mean, in that regard, so the stakeholders that exist are aware, right? And I mean, as I said, there's no real barriers or obstructions for any particular party that wishes to establish services, applications, whatever innovation they may want to come up with. There is really no barriers, right? You can access the IXP either directly or through one of the ISP members. And there's no question, there's no lack of demand for more online activity, online services, and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, if there are any incentives that can be built to encourage, to facilitate the development of those sort of homegrown services, I think that would be useful at this time seeing that, 5+ years have passed and we still haven't seen that natural ecosystem. I mean, but that natural ecosystem hasn't really been, bludgeoning through the door in terms of a host of local apps and online services and activities.
Right, but do you see that as the role of the ISPs or the IXP to initiate that, or do you see that outside of the whole ISP ecosystem?
I mean, obviously, if it is, the question is, when you say the role, if you're asking if the role of the IXP is to fund development,
no, not necessarily
to see that, right? Yeah. So if it's just a case about facilitation,
yes.
I would say that exists, right? I would say there's no, barriers or obstructions or walls we have been put up to facilitate, and to be honest, we are accommodating that. That's the nature of the IXP that exists here in Trinidad today, right? We have not put up charges, for every gig of traffic you send, you have to pay. There's nothing like that, right? So we haven't created any barriers that would, stop a particular developer or innovator from leveraging the IXP, So, I think it's a collaborative effort, and I believe the IXPs are on the table to assist in the collaboration.
Right.
In terms of helping fund development, I mean, that's something, I guess, some ISPs themselves may say, listen, maybe I could develop an application, and that is fine, right? And then host that application locally so that the traffic across it is, is carried across the IXP. I mean, I love that. Here's an example of that, right? During the World Cup, 2018 World Cup, one of the ISPs did develop a local streaming app to stream World Cup games, and they hosted it locally. And as a result, when we watched the traffic graphs during the World Cup games, I mean, once you watch that traffic graph for a day, you knew exactly what time a game was on, because you saw a jump in traffic just before the game started and just after the game ended, right? So, well, after the game ended, the traffic came back to normal. So ISPs have been doing their part in that regard, developing apps and so on. So it's just a case about continued collaboration and hopefully the right incentives are created to support and encourage further innovation and development in that regard.
Right, but I think that work needs to be done to really get dedicated actors to help to grow it and the content part of it. As you said, 5 years or more has passed, and that is the area that we're still struggling on. Another question, a couple of other questions in the chat. One of them is, when were these the two IXPs, when were they established? Because one was more recent than the other. And what would have been our local position without them during the COVID-19 lockdown?
Yeah. So the primary IXP was formed in about 2014, the secondary in about 2017. So they were well established long before COVID, thankfully. So it wasn't a case where we had to hustle. There were some upgrades done either just before or during COVID time to facilitate the increase in traffic. But for the most part, the IXPs were well established. What would have been our position? What I would say is, what that would have meant is a degradation in performance, just to summarize it, right? Through a number of the activities that people would have been doing during the COVID times. Whether it be online schools or whatever, because whether it be that the local traffic that was carried locally would have now had to be carried internationally, right? So we have either we'd have had to increase the cost of international capacity during COVID time just to carry this increased traffic. Whereas by keeping it local, there was no need to upgrade off-island capacity links. It was existing domestic capacity links which was able to carry the traffic. So I would say to summarize it, at the end of the day, if the IXPs weren't in place, you would have certainly seen a degradation in performance. And then by having a degradation in performance, you would have had less acceptance of people wanting to do school online or do a work call online, because when they join a work call online, it wasn't effective. They are able to communicate. The call always drop in. The quality is poor. Taking too long to share files. So I think in that regard, we were our productivity as an economy during the COVID times would have been negatively impacted.
Right. Can we put any kind of financial estimate on that? I mean, from where you sit?
That require a battery of economists to
Yes, yes.
quantify. I mean, certainly we could provide the source data in terms of how much traffic, how much traffic would have grown. We would have tried to estimate, what that increase in traffic, what that equates to in terms of work calls and online learning and so on. But yeah, I don't think the IXP in and of itself as a very slim, because the IXP itself doesn't have dedicated resources, right? We don't have an organization, right? So to do such of a nationalistic type assessment or analysis, I think we would have to engage one of our research agencies within the country to sort of come up with estimates of that regard.
Another question. This one's coming from Dr. Kim Malilu. Her question just disappeared. She said that the value of an IXP is clear. Can you comment on the total cost of running an IXP? And in Trinidad, we have two, and they're very different. So is the cost the same for each, or do you have different types of cost structures for these IXPs?
Yeah, good question. And to be honest, the cost of operating of the IXPs in Trinidad are very low. We've gone with a distributed model where, as much as possible, each ISP bears its own cost. So each ISP bears the cost of its own link to the respective IXP. In terms of the equipment, I think both the actual switching fabric were donated by the respective hosts at both IXP locations. So both data centers wish to have those IXPs established at them. So they provided the switching fabric and even the space, right? The co-location space for that switching fabric. That is donated by the respective data centers where the IXPs are located. So really it's a distributed model where a lot of various parties have borne the cost. Yes, there are some administrative costs in terms of annual returns, filing annual returns and doing financial statements and paying for website hosting, but those are very, very minimal and they're distributed equally across the various members.
So therefore, are you using a cooperative model then, and not a is it a cooperative model where because you said the different entities are bearing the cost, so they're not paying for the services and the IXPs?
Right. So there's various costs, like the cost to connect to the IXP, are borne by each provider. And then those common costs that we can't disaggregate, so things like web hosting, administrative, and so on, those are shared equally. So I would say, yes, it is cooperative.
Yeah. Right. Curly, I know you have a hard stop, so I will just ask one more question, and this is from DJ Williams. Is it possible to make an appropriate link between the amount of the traffic streams and the size of the population so that IXP managers can assure themselves that they are adequately prepared in case things happen again?
So yes, I think that would be the role of any capacity planning agency, and of course, if we're talking about ISPs here, that's what they do. That's their bread and butter: capacity planning and forecasting. So I would say it is possible that as I say, that's what we do. We would have, and we now have historical data that we can use to build our models or assumptions to allow us to be able to be prepared. And I would say we were prepared now, but to be better prepared in the event of a similar event occurring. Yeah. I want to tackle a question from Jerry George that I saw popped up. He made a comment about current IXP MOU requiring all existing partners to all agree to a new partner to join the IXP. So that's not exactly true. Again, it is a collaborative environment. So we do obviously share, if somebody wants to join, it is shared among all of the various ISPs who are members. Consent, unanimity is not required, right? As long as there's, unless it's a financial consideration, you don't need unanimity, you just need a majority. And obviously, if it is, for whatever reason, the majority of members are objecting to somebody joining, there would be a valid reason for that, right? We're not just objecting because, and you see, you can't just object because somebody's not an ISP, right? You have to object for valid reasons because our bylaws dictates that you don't need to be an ISP to join. These are the requirements. So as long as you demonstrate you satisfy the requirements and there's a majority of members, have no objection to someone joining, they can be joined. since our inception, we have added 2 members along the way. So it's not a case, it's not difficult to join. It's just a case about demonstrating you have the capacity to do so. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Curly. We really appreciate that you were able to spend this time with us this morning. There are more questions, and I'm sure if we kept it for another half an hour, the questions will still keep coming. I think we need to do this some more, get out here and keep educating our publics about the values of the value of the IXPs and really letting them know what has been happening. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll talk with you again. Right?
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. I'm really sorry I couldn't stay on much longer. I'm very intrigued to hear what Brent would have to say to the questions that were posed to him. So I may catch up with him afterwards. And just say hi to Dr. Malaleo. Since she posed a question to me, just extending greetings back. Yeah?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And we know that you were integral in the forming of the Grenada IXP as well. You were one of those stakeholders who was,
agitator. Agitator is the term, an agitator, yes.
Agitated, okay. All right, thanks.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes.
Curly.
Right,
Right,
no
so,
problem.
okay, bye-bye. We now welcome Mr. Junior McIntyre, a consultant at the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, to share his presentation with us at this time. Junior?
Hi, good morning, everyone. First, let me commend the excellent work that that Brent and Curly are doing in their respective regions. Just wanted to share that from the onset. We really appreciate the work they've been doing, and to dovetail into my presentation, the CTU's role really is to provide support to those guys out there in the trenches. I mean, they have been, as you would have gathered, most of the work, if not all of it, is volunteerism. And so at the CTU, we believe that, we need to put ensure that the appropriate support is given to these IXP managers across the region. So my presentation really in terms of the agenda would be just to give you a brief history of CTU's involvement in Caribbean IXP development, about specific projects that we are at presently coordinating as it relates to IXP proliferation and enhancement, as well as an IXP survey we recently distributed, just to get a baseline of where our IXP stakeholders are, and a brief to end briefly with the project methodology and stages as we move forward. So okay, the brief history, CTU's history in terms of involvement in IXP development across the region, it found its genesis in 2006 to 2008 when the Caribbean Internet Governance initiative was started. CTU began promoting IXPs as critical internet infrastructure in keeping with provisions of the Caribbean Internet Government or Governance Policy Framework. And from 2009 to 2010, we saw partnerships beginning to forge, specifically with CaribNOG, and you've heard that mentioned. CaribNOG mentioned Packet Clearinghouse, basically to raise awareness and advance IXP's development in our member states. So CTU would have been working with stakeholders to share the word, spread the good news about IXPs and the benefits to be derived from adoption. From 2011 to 2019, we continue to leverage regional capacity. So there was a switch, a focus a lot more on because we have, developed, as you have gathered, significant capacity in the region in terms of IXP proliferation, enhancement, and development. And so we've been working with CaribNOG and the Caribbean Parent Forum to establish, to support the establishment of at least 14 IXPs across the region. So this is just to give you a history of where we are. And this slide just gives you a sense of IXPs. Let me just get back, right? Okay, IXPs and the territories they have been commissioned in. So I know at the beginning of the presentation, we indicated that there are 10 active IXPs. So we have at least 15, we have approximately 15 IXP facilities. All right, so we have 5 that we would consider not really active, more or less dormant. And we also have in the French territory, which I'll speak to a bit later on in the presentation, coming soon. The CTU has been approached by Interreg to coordinate the implementation of 3 IXPs across the French territories, Saint Martin, Saint Barthélemy, and Guadeloupe. And so I'll speak to that a bit later on. So just to give you a sense of why IXP proliferation and enhancement is needed. And so one of the things we recognize, and it's clear from the presentations before, that we have currently most of our IXPs, the focus is on exchanging traffic, and we would have heard from 2 of the more progressive IXPs doing significant work. They're doing a lot more than just exchanging traffic. They're actually hosting content and services, and but we want the other IXPs that exist in the region to learn from and to collaborate a lot more. So we're seeing that there are success stories, but we really want to accelerate the whole process of collaboration and working together. So we want to move away from barely the focus on merely exchanging traffic, but actually encouraging content hosting and services to be hosted at the IX. The other thing we want to focus on is the whole issue of opportunities for growth. The focus on establishing initiatives to strengthen and enhance the value of the existing IXPs across the region. And we want to also catalyze entrepreneurship to leapfrog into the development of a Caribbean content industry. So those are the 3 areas that we figure that, okay, these are the areas we want to target. We believe, regardless of the obstacles we presently encounter, if we have collaboration and a collective approach at the regional level, we can certainly see benefits to our IXPs. Just to give you a sense of the project vision and objectives, the project focuses on 3 main areas: the whole issue of harmonization, all right, ensuring that there's a collective approach to the IXP development. One of the things that we found that is needed is the need to promote the social and economical benefits to our members, and that is really important. We want to ensure that policy is considered, policy decisions, when policy decisions are taken, that the IXP infrastructure is considered, IXP operations are considered. And we've been hearing from both Brent and Curly the whole issue of the lack of funding and support. And so we want to ensure that when policy, national plans, national ICT plans are in fact developed, that IXPs, as we quite aware, critical infrastructure is really considered and taken on board in a serious way. All right, so the whole issue of enhancing routing infrastructure and services to support enhanced regional collaboration is all about the whole issue of collaborating among the IXPs. The other thing is, of course, efficiency. We know about that. And Curly and Brent spoke about the whole issue of the COVID-19 pandemic as an example. And I just want to say that even at the CTU, we recognize that we were contacted by our operators during the pandemic to lobby on behalf of them with the content service delivery network operators, mainly the large ones, all right, to see how possible the support can be provided in terms of reducing the capacity from high definition to standard definition, in terms of content being streamed across, whether it's AWS or Netflix or YouTube. And so yes, there were challenges, and so obviously if IXPs, and obviously we heard a lot from Curly and both Brent in terms of the benefit of IXPs during that time. And so operators would obviously look in terms of optimizing their networks, would have leveraged the IXPs in a significant way. So, that we clearly see the need there. And the other areas, the whole issue of entrepreneurship, incentivizing new regional internet growth development opportunities, and that was also mentioned. But this slide really just gives you a sense of the intent to have a cluster of national IXPs facilitating connectivity of critical broadband internet infrastructure, and we see the impact of it. All right, impacting government, impacting research, impacting communities, health services, financial services, education. All right, so that is the intent. The intent is to move the conversation along, out of the, not necessarily the technical domain, but move it into the domain where governments see the need to invest in internet exchange points. And we believe CTU, because of our history, we are well positioned to ensure that happens. The other project is working in tandem with the Caribbean Proliferation and Enhancement Project, and that is focusing on, that one would have been focusing mainly on the English-speaking territories and the 15 IXPs that we would have identified. This is another project that the CTU was approached to coordinate. It's the Interreg. It's funded by or sponsored by Interreg. It's referred to as CARIBEX. Just to give you a sense, that the Interreg program is really a digital technology innovation sector project, and the objective is to improve access to critical internet infrastructure, and at the same time create an environment for fostering social and economic development among the French territories. So, I mean, this is important. The CTU, we saw this as a really opportunity to actually start the collaborations, working with our French-speaking, territories, and to leverage that we have been doing in the English-speaking territories in terms of the IXPs, and we can learn from each other. Again, we heard that. Various, for instance, Brent working with the other IXP stakeholders to provide support, and we're learning from each other. So what we want to do is really create a formal, in a sense, a formal structure to facilitate that. Just to give you a brief overview of what the CARIBEX project is about. Well, CTU's role is to coordinate the implementation as well as provide oversight, technical advice, and guidance. And let me just say, the CTU, we leverage our members, all those IXP managers, we leverage their expertise, we leverage their experience for all our projects. So it's really collaborative. Then we have the Dauphin Telecom. They are responsible for leading the implementation of the IXP at San Martin, as well as Telem. They are responsible for implementing the bridge between the IXP, OCIX, sorry, and Siloga IX in that region, as well as San Bartolome, the group of islands there. They will be responsible for creating the San Bartolome GIX, as well as the Guadeloupe Tech Association. They will be in charge of focusing on implementation of the Guadeloupe IX. So it's a really collaborative approach. And for the three territories, San Bartolome, their focus really will be on improving the reliability and service experience of the operators and users. That is their focus. Of course, there will be other benefits. In terms of the Guadeloupe, they'll be focusing on the whole issue of creating a simple and inexpensive tool to identify and route internet traffic in their territories locally. And San Martin focus will be on the digital bridge, as I mentioned before, and connectivity to the existing San Martin IXPs and IX, as well as establishing one geographic unit that will facilitate inter-island traffic. So, each stakeholder came on board with a specific focus and intent, and working together to achieve a common goal. So let me just quickly go through a survey that we recently administered. And this survey was circulated to all our IXP operators. We got 6 responses out of the 15. And this is just to give you a sense of where we are and a baseline. The first question was, and is dealing with the whole issue of governance, IXP governance. Is there an appointed dedicated IXP coordinator? And we, in terms of 4 responses, said yes, and 2 said no. So out of the 6, we have 4 IXPs that actually have a coordinator, and 2 don't have an official coordinator, an appointed coordinator. All right. So some of these results kind of start to tell the story and enforce a lot of the things you heard before. The second question is there an IXP oversight team? We have 5 respondents said yes, there's an IXP oversight team, that is 83%. And sorry, in 1 case, there isn't an IXP oversight team. Again, sticking with governance, the third question is if yes to above the previous question, how often does the team meet? So we had varied responses. We had 33% said in terms of we meet once a year. And then the other responses will, generally once every quarter, every 6 months, okay? And once a month. So, all those, I mean, this tells a story. I mean, clearly, if there is a regional collaboration among IXPs, then we could probably have a regional association. That was one of the questions we asked. And we got 100% response in terms of affirmative, in terms of yes, we should have a regional IXP association. And so we can have meetings, or IXPs can schedule meetings every month, every quarter to collaborate, and that will ensure consistency. It will help assist some of those IXPs that need more motivation and need incentives and along the way. So we're clearly seeing the benefit just from this survey. In terms of IXP policy perspective, another question is there a written peering agreement? 4 out of the 6 said yes, there's a written peering agreement, and 2 respondents said no, there aren't written peering agreements. And these are basic things, right? In terms of growth and sustainability of our IX operations, another question was, to what extent do you agree that the following growth enablers have been adopted at your IXPs? And we've been hearing about growth enablers during the last 2 presentations, right? And a few of the questions would have been, okay, a flexible peering and
Junior, sorry, we need to wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just get, because we don't have much time, and we need to get some questions in for you and Brent. Sorry to interrupt.
Not a problem. I mean, we get this idea with the this is the last slide I'm on now. We get a sense in terms of the projects and the stages and the methodology. So let me just tell you, as I repeated before, the survey, that's an idea to get the baseline. We will be moving to focus interactions among our members. And then we want to widen the collaboration, including the French territories. That project is scheduled to start in January 2020. And what we want to do is to take the policy prescriptions and proposals to the General Conference of Ministers for ratification and affirmative action. So that's quickly where we are.
Great. Thank you so much, Junior. We'd like to bring Brent back on because we would like the questions to be posted to both Brent and Junior at this time. We just have about maybe 6 minutes left for questions. Brent, can you come back on? In the meantime, while Brent is coming on, let me just say thanks to some of the other collaborators who have brought IXPs to the position that they are at now. The organization that I belong to, which is CaribNOG, was one of the early collaborators stakeholders in terms of getting IXPs up and running. There is also the Caribbean Peering, CARPIF, Caribbean Peering Forum, which happens every 2 years, where IXPs and ISPs come together and talk about the work that they're doing. So we have had some really, really good presentations this morning, and sorry that Curly had to leave, but let's just get into some of the questions that some of the participants have been asking. One person is asking, he says, Mark, Lindsay Ray says, I'm hearing in Mr. McIntosh's presentation that there was an attempt to address the size of data streams from mainstream content delivery services, presumably such as Netflix. Was that regional collective attempt successful in winning a meaningful hearing?
Yes, in fact, the CTU did respond. That specific issue was as a result of the COVID pandemic. I believe operators were struggling to provide the required services, especially the critical services to education and schools, hospitals, etc. And so, CTU was contacted to really lobby, on behalf of the operators with the content delivery providers. And so that was done and communicated, and actually some adjustments were made and we got feedback on that. So yes, it did result in some, but what we're saying beyond this is that we really want to, rather than have to respond to a crisis, we really want the IXPs to come into play. And that's what we really want to say. The issue there was the issue of the challenges that would impact us during periods where bandwidth is a rare commodity, and so certainly IXPs, if IXPs are used efficiently and more efficiently, then certainly we can see the benefits there.
Brent, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Junior. Excellent presentation. I just want to say that I think ISPs have really reacted to that change in seeing that some of the CDNs, especially Netflix, were trying to lower their streaming rates. ISPs, we've seen it in Grenada, the incumbents and the other ISPs, they have all increased their size of the links. In some cases, one ISP has connected with speeds as high as 20 gigs. That's 2 10 gig links coming into the exchange. And that's a big plus for us. The IXP went from a 100 meg 1 gig to now a multiple 10 gig infrastructure. And it's good to see that ISPs are actually taking this size connectivity into consideration and preparations for what can happen with our natural disasters and pandemics and so.
Right. Another question here. Again, this is concerning the Grenada IXP. How did the Grenada IXP get all the ISPs to buy into the IXP idea and not think that it was a competitive-based platform?
To be honest, and that's a great question, because initially, the trend of thought was all competitive. Collaboration was something we had to push and try to get eyes opened, But I think what was the initial and motivation behind pairing, and that was excellent to see in Juniors and C2 teams survey, was the benefit of local traffic exchange. I think that was the initial motivator based on our discussions. And secondly, I think it's the attractiveness of having top level root servers at the exchange and critical CDNs. I think, the ability for small ISPs to say, okay, well, we can actually save some dollars by first off, reducing our churn by getting customers to get a better end user experience and by saving on their transit costs, off island by using these local CDNs. So these were the two motivators initially. There are new ones now, but these were the main ones.
Okay, great. There's a question from Deidre Williams. She said, St. Martin and St. Martin, common IXPs. Would that solve the bandwidth overlap problem that plagues many of the small Leeward Islands?
That will certainly be an issue we'll be looking into, I'm sure, as part of the project. The project is due to start in January 2021, by the way. And so the focus will be on discussing all the core issues with all these stakeholders involved. So I'm sure those issues would arise, and pairing with IXPs and cross-border IXPs and stuff certainly will be something that will be part of the implementation. So yes, those issues would be considered and taken on board.
And we just have a couple more minutes. So one final question: what are the policy leverages regulators can take to best support local IXPs? We'll throw that at Brent first.
Yeah,
what do you think is necessary for our regulators?
Yeah, I would keep that one short, but I can tell you it's more so, I mean, great on the policies, right? And we have had a unique experience of having the regulator and grader being a facilitator and enabler as well. That's because a lot of their initiatives is geared around developing local infrastructure. But in terms of policy, and I think one thing I would mention here is just ensuring that it's a clear playing field and a fair playing field for not just ISPs only, but other enterprises such as the larger local universities, schools, that all be part of an exchange. I mean, because we're seeing education now and with remote virtual learning as critical. So we're thinking, it's just to help sort of streamline other non-ISP entities into, becoming part of that critical infrastructure, the IXP.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to add to
Sure.
what Brent said. One of the things is that we need to ensure that IXPs, the conversation with the IXPs are included in national ICT development, national ICT plans is almost non-existent. They're underrepresented. Yeah. So that it needs to start there. I mean, at that level, we don't want national development. You need to consider IXPs, and so once that is identified as as part of the policy conversation, then we can start to address the issues. But if it's dealt with as mainly volunteerism, an option, then we'll be dealing with the same issues time in, time out.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that there, Junior. It really is about the whole policy surrounding the internet exchange point. We have seen in these discussions this morning that implementing an internet exchange point is not the issue. We've always spoken about, it's 10% technical, the 90% really comes with the policies and the procedures and the stakeholders as they get involved in making the thing happen. So I'm seeing in the chat that people are saying that this was that they've learned a lot, that it was an excellent presentation. So I wish to thank Brent, who started off the presentations with his presentation this morning. Really excellent stories on the Grenada IXP, where it has come from, how it started, and where it has gotten to. But we do understand that there is still quite a lot of work to be done. We heard from Curly, who spoke about, what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the only Caribbean island that has 2 IXPs at the moment, and how that has helped with the COVID pandemic and the user experiences. Then Junior gave us some good statistics with respect to some of the surveys that were run against some of these IXPs that already exist. And I'm sure that the presentations will be available so persons can go over, especially Junior's presentation, and see some of those statistics that were presented. In the chat, there were also some really good links that were provided. Some of them were were put in there by Glenn McKnight. I always call Glenn a friend of Caribnal. And he had to leave earlier, but he had some good links. There was also another link by Sheila Francis to the that was put in the chat. So please make use of the chat. So once again, I just wish to say thank you for attending the ARIN CTU webinar series on accelerating 21st century government in the Caribbean. These discussions have been very fruitful. We really don't have enough of them, and we need to ensure that we're doing more because we're seeing the value of internet exchange points in the region. So we invite you to register for the next webinar in the series, which is Measuring Caribbean Digital Transformation, a data-driven approach, which will be the same time next week, Thursday, the 23rd of July at 10 a.m. The speakers for that webinar are the Honorable Medford Nicholas, Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Telecommunications and Information Technology of Antigua and Barbuda, and President of the General Conference of Ministers, Frederick Basuso, statistician, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development of the, of the OECD. So once again, thank you so much to Aaron and the CTU for this webinar series. Thank you to our presenters, Brent, Junior, and Curly. And thanks to all our participants, those joining live, as well as those on YouTube and Facebook. See you all next week. Stay safe and take care. Bye.